Hello, everyone. It's Jerry at the Fledge, and welcome to another episode of Every Damn Day. We're sitting here in the sanctuary of the Fledge with James's painting behind us. I've got Edward Smith's 2021 Key to Freedom, or The Cure, I guess, to Liberty. And he was on the show on Sunday, so check that out. It is a great show, in my opinion. And my guest today is Mr. Adam Grant. How you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing excellent. It's always good spending some time at the Fledge around good people. So,
well, you were here earlier, and then you took off and did something dangerous, huh?
Yeah, driving around with a car that it has brakes. I don't know if you'd completely call them that, but yes.
So, not your car either, right?
No, I'm helping a friend out.
You do that a lot, don't you? Help
I try
friends out.
I try to.
So, let's get into you a little bit. Where were you born and raised, and all that?
Born Eaton Rapids, raised all over the Lansing area. When I spoke on the panel here, I lived right over by Hunter Park for a big chunk of my life. I lived up here on Prospect for a while. I've lived all over Lansing. Before I went to prison, I lived on Chestnut over on the west side, and it was crazy back when I lived there. We're talking about like 1993. So, Lansing area. I've lived in different places. I was in Augusta, Georgia for a while, St. Joe, Missouri, Iron Mountain in the UP. There was a time that I moved to so many different places, and I had all the different accents that nobody knew where I was from. So
when you were in Lansing, like, where'd you go to elementary school? And
I didn't go to elementary here. I started going to school here when I went to Pattongill in the middle school. So I went to Pattongill, and I went to Lansing Eastern, and I used the word went loosely, because I went like part of the day most days.
Well, according to me, you're still a Quaker.
That's right, up forever.
All right. And then Eaton Rapids before that?
I was born in Eaton Rapids because the Charlotte Hospital sucked. Hayes Green Beach sucked, and so they drove to Eaton Rapids for me to be born. I lived in Charlotte, Vermontville, Potterville for my elementary years, and then I came to Lansing in my junior high years.
All right. So how old were you? What year was that, like, when you went to Eastern, or when you went to Eastern?
I started going to Eastern, and it would have been 84. I would have been the class of 88 if I'd have made it that long. Okay. So 84.
All right. So we crossed paths in the hallway, maybe. Well, maybe not, because maybe I graduated in June, and then you would have started in September.
Probably.
So
it's close, though.
I graduated in 84.
I think I remember you when you were wrestling, though, or something like that, because my cousins wrestled, and so they were big into that. They wrestled out at Holt.
Who were they?
Scott and Jimmy Workman.
Okay.
Jimmy was pretty good. Scott was okay.
Yeah. So shout out to wrestling. Did you do any sports or anything like that?
Yeah, I played football. I played basketball. I didn't often get a chance to do it long on an organized level because I didn't stay in school for very long. But I lived at the park at Hunter Park, playing basketball until the lights went out.
So what did you do after high school?
Well, before even the end of high school, I went to jail for the first time because I went to jail at 17, spent a year in there, including an attempted escape from the county jail. That kind of is a big chunk of my story. I went to jail at 17. I went to prison the first time at 19, and then I went to prison for my 27-year stint at 22.
Okay.
So that's where most of my adult life and late teens was spent, is in the carceral state.
I don't know how to ask this question, but you and I, we haven't known each other for a long time, but we click, I think, right? So what was going on there that when you were 17 and 19 and 22? Was it friends?
It started before that. My first robbery was at 12. And anybody old enough to remember a Zephyr gas station, I actually robbed a Zephyr gas station. I broke into the high school at 15. It was just, I guess the best way to describe it wasn't really friends. I did want to fit in, and one of the easiest ways to fit in is to be the most outrageous of the people. And I was always that people. Anybody who's ever watched The Town, I'm the guy when he says, you can't ask me any questions. Some people are going to get hurt. And he asks him, who's driving? Unfortunately, that was, me back in the day. It was a lot of just not knowing who I was. I guess I can kind of sum it up like this. Everybody kind of told me they always told me I had potential, but I always heard that word in a negative context. Yeah. So every time I heard that I had potential, it was because I wasn't living up to it. And at some point in time, you don't want it anymore because you're being judged by a standard that you think is unfair. So I just moved the bar down. It was easier to be a successful failure than it was a failure of a success.
So you go in for 26 years? Is that what?
27. 26 years, 10 months, technically.
Okay. And that's when you were 22.
Yes.
And so when did that put you out?
It put me out. I got out January 8th of 2020. I just beat COVID to the streets.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty awesome gift, especially since I just won an appeal that was not going to let me out until June of 2022. So I would have been sitting in there through all of this stuff and living in a petri dish, and where they closed down all the programs and people aren't even doing their work. And so I was blessed.
So inside the prison during COVID, I know you weren't there, but you obviously know what's been going on because you talk to so many people that are either coming out. Do you still talk to people that are inside? Or
no?
Okay, I got you.
But I do. I do know what's going on in there.
So was it a petri dish? What do you think was worse? That they just stopped services and started cutting things, or that they weren't treating people? They weren't.
I think it was a combination of things. I mean, what COVID did in most circumstances is it showed either how limber or how rigid you were. And a lot of businesses have flourished under this because they had a model that was easy to pivot. The Department of Corrections is not known for its limberness or its flexibility, and it already had a poor healthcare system that disincentivized people, to go and take care of, preventative care, or even if they had something wrong. So it was a terrible system. It was a confluence of events that just was a problem, waiting to happen. And this exposed it. And unfortunately, I still don't think they're fixing the problems. They're acting like they kind of don't exist. The whole system is designed to sequester and to keep everyone there separate from the rest of the world. They don't let the media in there ever since Geraldo in the women's facility down in Huron Valley. So they can pick and choose the message, and that's part of the problem. They didn't get out of their own way with this. They made it worse.
Let's talk a little bit. Is it a proper job that you have for the Nation Outside, or are you a volunteer? Or
I'm still a volunteer. I'm sure at some point in time I'll probably be working with them. I joke often that Ashley got my job because I interviewed for that job too. I don't believe in shooting for the job that you think you can get. Shoot for the job that you absolutely want and you think you're qualified for. I tell people a lot of times when I'll interview, I say, I may not be who you're looking for, but I'm absolutely who you need. And that's the way I felt about it in this situation too.
Would you, so here's what I was thinking, that you could tell us a little bit about the Nation Outside, and then let's go rewind a little bit for 26 years and 10 months, and talk about that.
Nation Outside, their whole thing is that they are for the formerly incarcerated, by the formerly incarcerated. Everybody who works with Nation Outside has been in prison in some way, shape, or form, because we don't think that it's the no decisions about us without us type of situation. We've been closer to the situation than anybody else. So if you're at General Motors and you're wondering what's going on with production, one of the places you're going to consult is the line. Mm-hmm. And so we see ourselves as the line workers, not the CEOs and things like that. Those are more like middle management. We know some of the things that'll work best, but we also know some of the things that absolutely don't work. So when you start talking about spending your money more wisely, Nation Outside, and one of the ways that we do this is through legislation, we can tell them that absolutely will not work. That is more destructive than constructive. And we're going to call it the way we see it, because we don't, no love lost in some of those situations. So we want to make a difference, but we're not going to pussyfoot around, and we're not going to tap dance around things. We're going to call it the way we see it. And they can disagree with us, but they can't disagree with the fact that I lived it for 27 years and they're talking about it theoretically.
I spent 30 some years in the quality management field, and I would be a consultant for an automotive company, and the bosses would sit me in a room and want to tell me all the problems, and I'd be like, no. Right. We're going out there where people can smell the defects, they can smell the trouble coming, they can feel it in their hands, they intuitively, almost magically seem to know what's about to happen, but it's because day in and day out they were there watching, learning, and using all of their senses.
And there's an energy and synergy that I think happens. Anybody who's been on a yard understands it, even CEOs. So I think about it like this. We know this happens in certain cycles. Like if you get enough women together and they live together, their menstrual cycles will sync up. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is not scientifically, you can't really say why this happens scientifically. If you get all these 1,600 men onto a compound, you sync up in some ways and you start to be able to feel stuff that nobody else would.
I tell people all the time, I can stand out on the porch and feel when the neighborhood's stressed, when the community's stressed. Yeah. And it's palpable. I mean, it's almost the air laying on you.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to Nation Outside in a little bit. What are some of the things you'd like us to know about what happened during those 26 years? 26 years and 10 months.
Yeah, don't forget those 10 months.
I won't forget those 10 months.
I won't either.
Life.
I don't know if it's anything that I would necessarily want them to know about what happened, other than the fact that the job that I have right now, working as the Jackson Area Recovery Community Coordinator for Home and New Vision, I got an interview with the CEO, and she stopped me at one point in time and she said, "Do you know you're a miracle?" And that really made me feel good, and it also made me feel sad at the same time. Sorry about this. I thought I shut it off once.
It's no problem at all.
But the whole thing about it is that I say it's both sad and happy, because of the fact that I feel good that I did it, but I also feel bad that it is seen as such an anomaly for a person to come out with their stuff together, ready to take advantage of these opportunities, because that's the way the system has been designed. It's been designed that people are cast away, and if you occasionally run across something that's salvageable, somehow that is a rarity, when I thought it was the Department of Corrections, which it should be helping to correct behavior, or the Department of Rehabilitation, or whatever the case may be. That's not what it is. So the bad part about it is when you hear about warehousing of prisoners, it's worse than that, because it's warehousing of human beings.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of those human beings are stripped of their humanity, and as they come out and try and reintegrate back into society, they've lost their way. Avenged Sevenfold has got a good line in one of their songs that says he who strips himself of what it is to be a man. I'm butchering it, but the whole idea is if you become a beast, you don't have the burdens of being a man, and that's unfortunately what often happens in prison. Is you just reduce yourself to a beast.
So, is the model for, let's say, rehabilitation to kind of break everybody down, almost like a military model of boot camp, where you break them down to as low as you can get them, and then think you're going to rebuild them into something? Or
that's exactly what the original model was. It's based on a military boot camp model to break them down and build them back up. Unfortunately, budget cuts always strip from the build them back up. It doesn't cost anything to break somebody down. It costs something to build them back up. So every time we've had these layers of budget cuts, they've pulled something away from the building them back up. And so now it's just a matter of, keeping the foot on somebody's neck and, saying, well, you should have thought about that before you came to prison. I used to tell officers that would tell me that nobody is madder at the 22-year-old version of me than the 48-year-old version of me. It's just a ridiculous and lazy comment to say, well, you should have thought about that, So
my guest, the guy who did this shirt, Edward, he was a officer in Jackson, and I can't remember all the prisons that he had named, becoming a sergeant eventually. And he told stories about his real job wasn't necessarily to interact. He wouldn't call you guys prisoners. He called you men. Interact with the men that he was serving. He actually said that word. His real job was keeping the other officers compliant with what they were supposed to do.
Right. And
the most serious complaints that he would field would be where the prisoners didn't feel safe because there were all the guards, they weren't up to the staffing levels that they were supposed to be.
Sure.
The systems got cut. Did you see, how are guards? Are they dicks? Are they
they're human
all
beings.
over the place?
They're human beings like everything else. And just like in any position, people have a tendency to get jaded, and it's easier not to care than it is to care. I had a tendency that in the last half of my incarceration, where I had started to really work on myself, to be conscious about the fresh officers that came in. You can't push up on them too soon because they've been told by the academy that everybody's trying to scam them. So if you come up and you start trying to talk to them too soon, that's what they're doing. But what I would do is I was always in the school building and things like that, and I would find opportunities to let them ear hustle. So if you and I were sitting somewhere, we would talk about something constructive, knowing they're going to overhear us.
Yeah.
And then eventually they'd end up talking to me about it. So it was kind of, you just created an opportunity for them to get a different view of what was going on otherwise. But I mean, you've got the gambit of individuals in there. I've got a couple that were staff members in there that I am still friends with today. When Katie and I get married next month, we're going up north and visiting one of those guys who was my boss up there. He was an A-Russ.
Not Katie Kelly, by the way.
No, not Katie Kelly.
So he talked about that he got to the prison and the prisoners knew his job better than he did.
Yeah.
Like, what they're supposed to do, what they can do, what they can't do.
Yeah. We know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. There's a difference between can't and not supposed to, but you're absolutely right. Most of us, I worked in a law library for years. So I knew what the PDs and the OPs were. I knew what the law stated, but also that a lot of that got stripped over the years too. I mean, they wanted to stop frivolous lawsuits, and so you can't even do real lawsuits anymore. You can't even access your own prison file because you're not entitled to the Freedom of Information Act. I literally have a letter at home from the Eaton County Sheriff's Department that says you are not a person because you are not this, or this. And the fact is you are a prison, which by definition, a prisoner, by definition, makes you not a person by this law.
Really?
Yes.
Eaton County?
Eaton County, but that's the state law. The state law is literally a corporation is a person, but a prisoner is not.
See, that's wrong.
Yeah.
So you walk out of prison, you have empathy for everybody that's in those walls, the guards, your fellow inmates, maybe is the better word.
Sure.
But I think that's pretty miraculous.
I think it is too. I did a interview for a podcast that University of Michigan does called While We Were Away. And that was one of the things they asked. They said, what was the thing that you're most proud of? And it just came off the top of my head and the top of my heart. The thing that I'm most proud of is that I still care. Nobody would hold it against me if I didn't give a shit about anything anymore except for me. But I care about me in the midst of everything else because I genuinely believe that everything is connected. And so therefore, I'm not going to do better unless you're doing better, or at least have the opportunity to do better. So I don't believe in this selfish or selfless are both on opposite ends of the spectrum, and they're both unhealthy. Mm-hmm. You have to be self-aware somewhere in the midst of that. And being self-aware means that I'm also aware of the people around me. In any way I may be able to help, including driving their car that barely has brakes.
So while we're on the prison side right now, I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a gentleman came to me. His name is Darryl Alexander. He's still a great friend of mine. And we talked about what he did. We talked about, him getting out after 26 years, sentenced as an 18-year-old and all of this. And one advice that he gave me that I think is very good, but I want to confirm with you that this is a good advice. Doesn't matter what you did. I've never asked you that. Right. I've never asked you that since the day I met you.
Right.
And I think that's important, right? You're out, you paid your debt, you still got to do this parole a little bit, which might be the end of the debt or whatever. Sure. But is that solid advice? Like, don't ask people.
I think it is. I think it is because there's an element of truth to the idea of ignorance is bliss too. So it's not only the idea that you've paid your debt, but it's also that you don't want to know other things, so you don't have to unpack other things associated with them. Because questions often beget more, actually answers often bring about more questions and things that you need to know. I often say what I was in there for just because the amount of time that I did has people wonder. Because when I used to write people overseas and stuff about how much time I got, they could not believe it. They were like, you didn't kill anybody? I didn't even assault anybody. I robbed a bank, don't get me wrong. And I did it with a shotgun. I terrorized, people in the small town of Vermontville. When somebody comes into town with a shotgun, goes into their little only bank in town, it freaks the whole town out. So I'm not minimizing what I did. But most people, when they hear somebody doing 27 years in prison, automatically assume there's a body.
Right.
And there wasn't.
Well, I'll bet you there's a lot of people that where there was a body that got less time than that.
That's true. And I've seen them leave, or they've done other things. So that idea that, you've paid your debt to society, some people will dispute that because some people will say that justice was not done in the sentencing and things like that. But I also believe in the big picture, justice will be done. And if there's more punishment yet to be done, it's not on us to do it. Matter of fact, we taught an ethics class in there, and we had a version of justice because there's 3 aspects of right relationship: reverence, goodwill, and justice. The justice one trips people up a lot because the version that we talk about justice is giving a person what they need to be whole, not what we think they deserve for not being so. So it's not a just desserts version of justice. It's what does this person need to become their fullest and greatest self?
So the person who's in prison, or everybody?
Everybody.
Restorative justice, they call it sometimes.
Yeah, it's in the vein of restorative justice, and I think it's also in the vein of just constructive justice, because sometimes it's not even a matter of restoring something. There was a concept in a group called Houses of Healing that was called forgiving on neutral territory, which I thought was a really interesting, because you had not even done anything to offend me. But there's sometimes that we meet somebody and we're immediately offended, maybe because they're an officer or because they're this. And forgiving on neutral territory has nothing to do with actions. It just has to do with the fact that you know their innate worth, whether they know it or not. I thought I was a piece of shit for the longest time because I had so much of it stacked on top of me. And so that's the same kind of thing. People dealt with me in that vein because that's what they saw. And as I uncovered myself, I saw something different. And so did other people.
I'm going to take a small break from this for a second. Just say hi to Farhan. And he says, keep up the good work. And I'm sure he's talking to you.
I'm going to say it to him too. You keep up the good work too.
You know who Farhan is?
I know who Farhan is.
Love Farhan. So he is someday going to be a great leader of our city. He already is a great community leader.
Absolutely.
When you said that, when you talked about the making people whole or giving them what they need, I always think about this. There's no babies, that are born to be a drug addict, that are born to be a prisoner, that are born to be a criminal, that are right. We do this to you somehow.
Right.
And I say we, the collective, the community, the systems, the government.
Right.
And I think you and I agree, we should be spending a lot more time and energy helping people that we failed, because we failed that 12-year-old. Why would you even think that you would have to do that? And I'm sure there were a bunch of reasons that are super complicated, but what do you think we could do as a society or as a community to not, I guess, transform people into the space where they want to commit a crime?
For one, I think we have to acknowledge it. One of the things that anybody who's ever been in prison will recognize is that every class and every course tells you I take complete responsibility for all of my actions, which to me is a cop-out.
Yeah,
it lets society off the hook. I'm not saying it's society's fault, but it is a shared responsibility. So as soon as I say I take complete responsibility for my actions, then they can say, okay, well, good. It's a personal thing. I didn't have anything to do with it. We used to talk about in the ethics class that in our society, we always take people to the center of the square and then we put them in the,
the locks or whatever.
Exactly. And we would put them on display and humiliate them for the worst thing that they did. And there's a story about a South African village where when somebody would do something wrong, they would take them to the center of the square and everybody would come to the center of the square. But the difference was they would tell them everything they did right in their life to remind them of who they really are, not to reinforce the worst thing that they ever did in their life. And sometimes this would take days. And I think we need to do something more like that, like the quarantine system. Even when you do come into prison, the quarantine system is designed to figure out what kind of threat you are. They say they figure out what kind of programs you need, but it's this really basic, programming idea, like custodial maintenance. Custodial maintenance is just preparing you for another prison term so that you can make more as a porter, because you can't get a job in a hospital as a janitor. You can't get a job in a school as a janitor. The good places, you can't get the jobs. So it's a really lazy, it's politics. It's all about appearances. Let's not actually do anything, but let's have plausible deniability because we did this, and this.
Is that where they categorize you into like level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5?
Sure. And then they say your SASE test says this, so you have to take this substance abuse. You don't have your GED, so you'll take your GED, and maybe we're going to put you into building trades. Or they don't really, like you do here, where you actually tap into people's strengths and find artistic expressions. It's a lazy version of parenting. A lot of times parents will try and reinvent themselves through their kids. You know, they haven't figured anything out about the kid, and they're already going to be the next great thing in football or whatever. And the kid wants to be an actor or wants to be an artist, and that never gets realized. This continues to happen in our adults, and they keep having these things suppressed.
I could have cried for days when my son didn't want to be a wrestler, but we started skateboarding instead, and I didn't cry once.
That's cool.
So, you know, that's the second thing, though, that people do, right? If it's not the kid's fault, then it's the parents' fault. They need to keep them at home, and they need to do all of this. And I just think that anybody that ever says that has never been a parent before, because kids are tricky. And there's a lot of things you can do right. There's a lot of things you can do wrong.
Sure.
And then there's a lot of a big world that you're not with the kids. They're at school. They're with their friends. They're watching, you know, whoever do whatever.
And the parents have limited experience, so they can only bring so much to bear. I do an exercise in one of my classes that I've got a red, a blue, and a green marker that I showed to everybody. But I gave you a black one. And so I say, I'll give $10 to anybody who can tell me which marker I told Jerry was the winning marker. And so they're going to pick the ones that they see because that's all they're aware of. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do all the time. You hear guys have been programmed. So they're in prison saying, oh, I knew what I was doing was wrong. But did you really? Did you fully understand it? Somewhere along the lines, you were told that this was worth it and this would pay off and it was worth the contrast. It's the Socrates, those who know better do better. It means those who truly know better will do better, not just peripherally know something.
Well, I look at the kids, you know, some of the kids, not every kid, but some of the kids in this neighborhood, and the opportunities they see revolve around guns. It revolves around Percocet or drugs. It revolves around, you know, having the coolest gun and showing that off. And I love your experiment. I hadn't heard this before, and I want to try to actually steal it from you or use it or borrow it or get a license for it.
It's free.
But that's exactly right. The window of believable opportunity is so slim that that's what you know, that's what you do, and that's what I guess the consequence becomes.
Yeah. And other stuff for somebody else.
And that's without all of the racial bias and everything else. That's just, if all of us, if the system wasn't like that, it would still be problematic. Then the racial bias, or probably tons of different bias.
Which is baked into the American system. It is. I mean, I did a short post on that myself with the idea of, as difficult as it's been for me after getting out of prison after all these years, I still did it as a white male. Mm-hmm. And so there were assumptions. I'd go to some of these interviews and they'd see stuff like DOC and stuff on there, and they would automatically assume that I'd been an officer. You know? And
you keep silent on that?
No, I didn't. I probably should. Because
you probably shouldn't.
I wonder about that sometimes too, because I wonder about that idea of, you know, white privilege and using it to the best advantage. I call it infiltration, and it's not just with white privilege. It's with male privilege. It's with, I talk about my suits. I bought some suits when I got home, and I haven't had a chance to wear them, but that's my camouflage because it gets me into doors that they don't know what they're letting in. And then as soon as they let in, it's like, now we're going to talk about some real stuff, you know? So I think that there's a responsibility that comes with the privilege that we have, and not just so easily getting rid of it, but getting in somewhere and then using it to our advantage.
I always think we have to try to redistribute it. It's like wealth.
Absolutely.
Right. So I was going to bring up white privilege, but you did it first. Did you have that inside?
Oh, it's the opposite inside.
Is it?
It's the opposite inside, because a lot of things, the tables are reversed. And a lot of people, a lot of white guys especially, will come out of there, and if they had an inkling of racism going in, they're extremely racist when they come out, because they didn't know how to adjust to the fact of no longer having their privilege and actually having to navigate on their own terms, and they click up in there and everything like that. And I was a little bit of I wasn't always this way, but I found my way, and I've always kind of identified more with people who have to struggle and people who are in difficult situations for most of my life. So naturally, when it comes to Black and brown people, I found that more of a family setting there, more of a real situation because they've been through some stuff. And so I made conscious decisions about a lot of these things. Like when you go into the chow hall in a penitentiary, ask anybody, anywhere you go, there's a white side and there's a black side. And so when you first come into the facility, most times, and I'm not saying it's completely white and black, but everybody knows this is the white side, this is the black side. And I would always make a conscious effort to, when I'd see that, to automatically go to the black side because I wanted to make a statement, because I stand with people who are oppressed, as opposed to people who, haven't, or who have been the oppressors. I think that's extremely important. I didn't experience a lot of the reverse racism that you will sometimes, because there's clapback, that if you've been treated a certain way your entire life, there are a lot of people who look for the opportunity to, redistribute that. I found it on occasion, but I also found a lot of people that when I stood with them, they stood with me. And yeah, that's important.
There's a lot of code, a lot of rules that you guys live by, right?
And they changed over the years. When I went in 93 and when I came home in 2020, there was a whole different set of rules. Code.
Is that something you can share, like an example of that?
Well, one of them is that racial component. When I went in for my first bit in 1990, I literally had a friend who came back to the county jail, a black friend, and he told me, he said, "Listen, man, we won't talk in there." And I'm like, "What do you mean we won't talk in there?" He's like, we each ride with our own. And I had a problem with that. It sent me to the hole a lot early on because I didn't necessarily buy into that. Quite frankly, I didn't. I mean, I grew up over here, around a lot of Hispanic and a lot of blacks and a lot of Native Americans. And so that's always been my people. That's been my tribe. And so to get in there and all of a sudden now you're telling me I have to associate with this group of people that I don't have a whole lot in common with. And I didn't like the way they would, talk about other people. It would always create problems. So I had a lot of problems in my first bit. Plus I was just fine back then. When I was a good looking dude. I know it's hard to notice now, but it was a rough few years. So, but I learned from it and I appreciate it.
Rena, who will be my guest tomorrow, is sending some love.
All right, cool.
So,
thank you.
What would you say, like, what are you trying to do with the nation outside? What's your mission? And do you have a personal mission, a mission? Do you ever try to not cut this part out of your life, but work more on the part that doesn't have to do with going to prison and being formerly incarcerated?
No, I don't ever try. A lot of people do. A lot of people do, and a lot of people try and leave that behind. I've done a total of 31 and a half years in some way, shape, or form of incarceration. I get off parole in January. I've been under some form of either incarceration or supervision since 1985. And so it's a huge part of my life. I will be 63 years old when I reach the half in, half out point.
And how old are you now again?
51.
51.
So not only don't I want to leave that behind, I don't think I should. It's a huge part of my experience. And it's like we're Quakers for life, and if you're a Spartan or a Wolverine or a Sooner or whatever the case may be, you take those for life. And I think most people don't even think to ask do you leave that behind? Prison is one of those things that it's seen as such an unpleasant thing that it's a natural thing to think that you leave it behind. But I lived in there too. I lived in there. I've some of my best friends, are still in there. There are people that I genuinely love that are still in prison. And just in general, I just don't think it's the right way to treat people, because it's an opportunity lost and it's used improperly. They asked me on one of the podcasts I did if I'm an abolitionist, and believe it or not, I'm not. But I am an abolitionist when it comes to the current system, because I don't know if you can build something that is healthy on something that is this cancerous and it's metastasized in so many different ways.
In systems theory, they say wastebasket the system, throw everything out and start all over again. Yeah. And it's exactly how I feel about policing and the judicial system and all of that. Yeah. Rena's asking here, how do you break the cycle? And I think she's talking about, maybe, actually, if you want to clarify, Rena, please do. But I would guess it was just the cycle of the school to prison pipeline.
That's a huge thing, but I think ultimately it comes back to everything is a matter of relationships. So it comes back to individual relationships and investing in those relationships. So it's not, we're not going to fix anything by movements or causes. We always have to remember that it's human beings behind these things that happen to have something in common. So you can address the commonality after you address the humanity. So I think we just have to take a more human, and not even necessarily humane, a more human approach to these things and realize that, you get in what you put out. It's like putting data into a computer. If you're putting junk into it, you can't be so upset when you get junk out. The problem is the systems have decided where they're willing to put junk out and what's considered trash. And I use this example because a lot of times we've all heard the term white trash. Mm-hmm. Why don't you hear about black trash or brown trash or red trash? Because that was always the assumption. It was always okay to dispose of them. And white trash was the portion of their own that they were willing to go ahead and throw away and dispose of as well. So we need to stop looking at that. There is no such thing as human trash. I tell people all the time, depending on what your religious beliefs are, God made everything except for trash, because he knew human beings would do that, because we turn so many different things into trash that don't need to be.
I remember those rich white kids, some of them calling me white trash, and another W word that I'm not sure I'm allowed to say, but I don't want to say anyways.
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I've been called it too.
I think you and I might have had the same mindset when we were younger.
Sure.
I don't know what kept me out sometimes, because I did some shady shit, and just wrestling, I think, probably was my savior.
Well, and everybody's needed in different places, and sometimes all it takes is just a small adjustment. And so you made enough small adjustments that you ended up in the same place that I am without having to take the same course. And both of us are needed in this fight, so we can't all end up in the same place.
Rena clarified a little bit. How do you go from being in prison to relating to people in their current space, and what changed your mindset?
There's an interesting thing. My fiance took a picture of me. I was sitting out on the porch one day, probably maybe 6 months after I'd been home, got a glass of ice water in my hand. I got my feet kicked up, and she said, I want to send this in to a friend of mine, JP, so he can see the free Adam. And the same day, JP responded back and said, I don't see any difference. Adam must have been free before he got home. And I think that's the key is there's this wait until tomorrow, wait until this happens. When I have this, I'll be happy. And people do it inside the walls and outside the walls. So the key is to get back in there and start relating to the people that are already in there. It's relating to the people who are in trouble, and it's relating to the people who live in environments that might breed trouble. So getting into all of those situations and being preventive, being proactive, and loving on people. Nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. And a lot of these kids that people and causes are claiming to want to save are talking at those kids instead of talking with those kids.
I keep going.
No, go ahead.
I think about the recent spike in gun violence in Lansing. I think about, everyone will talk a lot about the victim and the victim's family and all of that. But I'd also like to be the guy that's in the village that comes and gives this kid a hug, because that shooter, he doesn't understand. He doesn't know what he's really getting into. He doesn't really understand the long-term ramification.
No.
I know a lot of kids that I've talked to that say, well, I shoot over their heads.
Right.
And they
or
don't
on the
know.
ground and it ricochets and hits people.
And I want to be that village that comes to the center of town and gives the love, not the village that this isn't a judicial system. It's a revenge system. We're trying to get revenge and break you down.
Right.
But then there's another big part, and you're hinting to it, but let's take it on a little bit more. The industrial prison complex, the for-profit.
Sure. Industry too. I went back and looked at the definition for industry, and it has become an industry in and of itself. And so I remember posting, and I don't remember exactly what the definition was, but it was basically, what is the product? Because it doesn't talk about people in industry. It talks about a product, a raw product.
Yeah.
So what is the raw product of the prison industry? What I think it is, and most people don't want to talk about it, is votes. Because every one of these prisons are put in to economically depressed areas, usually rural areas. And so you buy an entire voting block. Then that doesn't even count the gerrymandering that they do, where they try and include the prisoners in the census. So you've got an additional 2,400 people in the little town of Carson City. I mean, literally in 2010, they told me I had to fill out the census and I had to fill it out with that address. No, the law states this might be my mailing address. My residential address is here in Lansing. I'll fill it out. And I kept filling it out with that address on it. And they would not let me do it.
That's pathetic.
It is. And so that's what I think it is it's votes. That's what the raw product is.
Do you think that at a real micro level, is the guard incentivized to make you, make use the wrong word, but to rehabilitate you? If I don't even know the phrases to use right now.
They're not incentivized, and they're not inclined to believe it. It was somewhere in the 70s. There was literally a paper that was written called "Nothing Works," and within 6 months, it was debunked by every possible person in criminology and stuff like that. And they still use it to this day because they want to. So they're saying, why invest in rehabilitation? Because it doesn't work. Why invest in this? Because it doesn't work. And that's, quite frankly, with the jaded people, that most of them, and I'm not saying all of them, I'm saying the jaded portion, which is a significant portion of people who work in corrections, don't believe anything works anyway. And so they believe in a zero-sum game. So anything that they somehow invest in us is money that's being taken away from them. Their union has been getting weaker and weaker every year, and their contracts have been getting worse and worse every year. And they blame us, not the administration. How crazy is that?
It's definitely again, the capitalists stealing from the workers.
Exactly.
And the workers taking it out on the exact wrong people. This is what we do in our city every day.
Yeah.
Right? We fight with each other because we're getting less, because the pigs at the top are taking way too much.
Crabs in a bucket.
Yep.
Crabs in a bucket.
So this sounds like a pretty simple problem to take on and solve here.
Sure. I think we just fixed it.
Did we? Well, nothing works.
Right.
Tomorrow.
Nothing works, right.
Prevention's so hard to predict, right? You don't. It's a smile you gave to some kid one day when they were losing their freaking mind that made them do something a little bit different. That maybe that was what I had.
Yeah.
Somebody did that to me, and that I took that path, and you took a different path.
Yeah.
And we're right back here, thankfully.
Yeah.
Glad to know you. And but you can't measure that.
No.
Nobody ever recorded that smile. You can't measure prevention very well.
No.
Because it takes too long, right? And so, yeah, it's easy to discredit these things. It's easy to, oh, that didn't work. He was supposed to be perfect now.
Not only that, but you're asking people to employ something that has more nuance to it. And people don't like nuance. I think people like a fundamental way of doing things. They like rules, they like laws, then they can follow them and they can blame somebody else if they don't work. Most people don't like principle-based ideas. And so you're talking about principle-based ideas. And I use the example of the easiest way to decipher that is in a rule-based ethical system, you've got like the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. That's pretty clear. There's no interpretation to it. But in the same vein, in the same Christian philosophy, you would use, what would Jesus do? It doesn't tell you what to do or how to do it. It asks you to question. And I think that's the thing is that you have to think about what is the value of that smile? How can you multiply? I saw you do something and help a young lady the other day with the idea of helping someone else with the thing. And I do the same thing. You can use capitalistic ideas to do things that actually make a difference. You can invest so that it has a 2 or 3-fold reach in it. But that's not the materialistic society we're in. We don't invest our time. We don't invest our money. We spend both of them, which is very different. And that fills landfills and prisons. That's what prisons are. They're landfills for human beings.
I want to go back to, because you just kind of put my values, not rules, into a completely different context that I didn't realize. Maybe that's where this has been coming with me, but it's a principle-based. Rules are easy. You said lazy a few times. People are lazy about it. So it's easy to say, all right, somebody put gum on the floor. Now there's not going to be gum anymore.
Right.
But it's more difficult to say why it's a problem there's gum there and what that does to other people and what you could do alternatively. That takes too much work. Writing a big note, no more gum.
Right.
Super easy.
Right.
And then you enforce it, and then the kids break the rule. So pretty soon it's no more kids and it's no more this. And then you end up with an empty church, which is what I think happens.
Sure. And then they level the church.
Yeah. No,
because the church was the problem too. Right.
We'll take the buildings.
Yes.
Ken Dale's disagreeing with me, and he's right. And that he's saying prevention can be measured when it's implemented systemically, and there's a lot of science in prevention. But at the same time, that kind of average person on the street, if I believed in prevention, and I've spent my whole life, I think, in prevention, why am I still smoking?
Sure.
Right? Because that measurement it seems so far away. I'm an idiot. I know you don't need to write that, Ken.
And I'll agree with him in the fact that you can measure it, but not to a finite degree. You can measure trends. I believe in prevention. So you can measure things that work better than other things. And I think that's what you're dealing with more often with people is what is better than the alternative. The problem is what was the name of that book? Better is the enemy of good or good is the enemy of great or something like that in the business idea. Sometimes that can get because people are okay with better and then they invest in this. People become dogmatic about ideas. So it's not just about religion. You've got people in the MPOs that I'm working at that are dogmatic that they're the only ones that know how to fix the problem. Prevention is one of those things too, that they work a leg of prevention and their statistics say this and therefore that's what works. I think prevention as a whole has a tendency to work. It's hard to measure all of the aspects of it because like you said, you can't measure that smile. You can't measure a kind word. And those things go a long way.
I mean, and there's things people don't even know what prevention is either, right? Mm-hmm. Some people will say that adding 10 more police is going to prevent crime.
Right.
And it's going to be 10 more guys that are late to show up after the crime has happened.
Don't mind me. I'm actually seeing if Tony Gantt still got me picking him up at the tire dealership.
What time we got to do that?
That's what I'm trying to find out too.
All right. So let's keep cruising then.
Yep.
What do you do every damn day to push your needle forward, your mission forward?
Stuff like this. I show up. A lot of people overcomplicate, what's my purpose? What was I created for? And they get too specific about it. I've heard people say to be a father and things like that. And I think those are an expression of your purpose as opposed to your purpose. And I realized that my purpose is to be a beneficial presence, which is pretty simple. And again, I'm one of those principle-based people so you can't fully quantify it, but it's simple. To be a beneficial presence, I have to show up, which I'm here, and I have to do my best to benefit whatever it is that I'm a part of. So I show up for Nation Outside events. I show up because I love what KT's doing with Power and Passion. I think she's got a brilliant idea that everybody else is fighting about all these other things. And she just wants to kind of bring everybody together so they can find one another and know exactly what they're doing and be genuine resources. I show up for podcasts like this because I think conversations like this are necessary for people to be a part of and to be able to witness. So I just show up, and sometimes I'm more a benefit than I am at other ones, but I do that every damn day.
I'm throwing Rena up here one more time too, or not one more time, but again, the beneficial presence that really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Because people talk about that, especially in substance use, right? You're not present when you're using, you're not present when whatever's happening, but they just say presence, and you don't just show up and be present.
No, beneficial is both of them are important. One of them is what does beneficial mean if it isn't tied to something, and what does present mean if you're not? Just showing up, don't get me wrong, just showing up creates opportunities, but showing up with the mindset that I'm going to be beneficial while I'm there is a whole different beast.
Yeah. Are we screwing Tony over or anything?
No, but I do have to leave here soon because I told him I was going to be a few minutes late.
Let's keep rolling then. We daisy chained the shows together. Mm-hmm. Yesterday on the show, I had David Hess, who's got the podcast, which ironically you're going to be doing his podcast tonight.
Right.
His question to you is, what podcast do you listen to?
I don't listen to a lot of them, but one of the ones that I have listened to is the Michelle Obama podcast. I think she's brilliant. I think her voice is soothing. And so even when she's talking about the end of the world with stuff, I feel a little bit better and I can process it a little bit more. So Michelle Obama. I mean, there are some other ones. Path to Redemption is one. I'm actually going to be on Cordell Simmons' reentry podcast on the 31st. He's based out of St. Joe, Missouri. So I listen to him. Life of a Lifer is actually done by Taylor Conley out of, I think, Oregon, and he's doing a life sentence out there. He literally does it over the prison phone.
Yeah.
But Michelle Obama,
they allow him to do that?
I think so. I think so.
What about you ever listen to the While We Were Away?
Yes, I've listened to all of them. I actually tried to get on one of them, but I was too late. They already had them all done. Matter of fact, I'm at least Facebook friends, and I've met some of the guys at some of the events and stuff. So, Aaron Kinzel and Jose and Rick Speck. Rick Speck and I used to play against each other on softball teams all the time in there, and Cosine Welch. I'm fans of a lot of those guys that are doing that. So I love what they're doing.
Did you ever meet any famous people in prison?
I met Dr. Kevorkian.
Damn it. That's who I was going to say.
I met Dr. Kevorkian at a lower stage before I'd really started to get my stuff together. And he's an asshole. And he thought he was somebody important. And I accidentally squirted him with my juice one day. We had these bags of juice at Lapeer, and I poked, and I didn't have my thumb over the end of it, and almost squirted him. He said something smart, And I told him, I said, "You're lucky I'm on the path I am, or I'd have beat your ass just so I made the news."
It's, Darryl served with them too.
Yeah.
And he says Dr. Kevorkian taught him how to play chess.
Right.
So I don't know if that's true or not.
Right. I've met some infamous people in there too. I met John Fry. Matter of fact, I was reading the book about John Fry before I met him, and he's killed somebody down there in Cass Corridor, and they cut them up into pieces and spread them all across the state. Met Donnie Miller. Everybody in Lansing area knows about Donnie Miller. So yeah, I met more infamous people than famous people.
So tomorrow on the show, I have Rena, who's talking, and I will send that link, Rena. But we gotta hustle here a little bit. What question would you like me to pass to Rena? The New Citizens Press, by the way, is Rena's organization.
The basic question, I don't remember exactly how I worded it, but the basic question that I have is, what biases are you aware of, and how are you working on them? Because I think we all have them, and we don't necessarily work on them consciously.
Yeah.
So
I turn that question on you.
Okay.
What's one of your biases that you're working on?
I come across them daily, so it's kind of hard to. I understand that I am biased by being human. And so therefore, if I find myself in a situation where I'm judging as opposed to being open to what's coming to me, then I immediately kind of stop myself and ask, where did that come from? Is it helpful to the situation? Is it hindering? What can I do to change it? And so it's a slow evolution to things, but I'm constantly doing that. Thankfully, I don't find as many of them as I once did, because I'll brush up against something and I'll be like, oh, that's right, you're working on that one. But like I said, those things change. Those things change all the time. And one of the easiest biases that I've been working on has to do with people in authority, with this assumption that I somehow know the logic that's going on to that. And I need to ask them questions just like I'd ask anybody else questions.
Yeah. And so in about an hour or so, I'll publish a TikTok where I answer the same question, and I'll ask people to stitch and TikTok their response as well. But man, I feel like my list is really long, because I got some church things, I got some police things, I got some government things.
Right.
And now it's going to make me re-examine what bias, because there might be good bias, right? And there might be bad bias. And in every system, there's bias, every measurement system.
Right.
That's my thing. I'm a mathematician, so I love this word bias. Great question.
All right.
Happiness, sadness, joy, hope, or love. Which word would you like to talk about? Or words?
Let's pick sadness real quick. And I think we talked about this idea, and it doesn't get enough. It doesn't get enough play, especially, in general, but I think men and returning citizens especially don't talk about this idea. And we didn't learn how to deal with it very well while we were in prison. If you've ever been to a psychiatrist or psychologist in prison, one of the things that they do, you get 15-minute increments, and you might get scheduled.
Not even warmed up yet.
No. So I think sadness is something that needs to be talked about a little bit more, and understand that sadness and depression aren't the same thing.
Right.
They're very far apart from one another. So if you've experienced sadness and how debilitating it can be at times, imagine that 100-fold with people who are dealing with depression and have a hard time pulling themselves out of it. And people are like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Easy to say, but if the person doesn't have bootstraps, it's a ridiculous.
Well, it's such a bullshit term.
Yeah.
So, first of all, talking about sadness admits vulnerability.
Sure.
Right. So you don't want to be vulnerable probably when you're you don't want to be vulnerable in a locker room. You don't want to be vulnerable in a prison. You don't want to be vulnerable on a football field or whatever.
No.
So it doesn't get talked about.
No.
Why is it so important?
Why is it so important to talk about it?
No, just the feeling itself.
Well, I think it's balance. It's kind of like anger. Anger's, sad's bodyguard, I heard it once said, but anger also helps you stand up for yourself sometimes. Sadness also lets you know when you're hurt. If my knee hurts,
Right.
It lets me know to pay attention to it so I don't tweak it and hurt it worse. So if something makes you sad, pay attention to it and sometimes dissect it. Why does it make me sad?
I often say it's like the stove. When you touch the stove and you pull your hand back,
Yeah.
something just told you something to protect yourself or to learn or to do whatever.
Absolutely.
Do me one favor, though, and I know I'm keeping you too much.
Sure.
Tell me about happiness real quick, because we talked about that as a potential word.
Yeah, happiness is one of those things that I don't like the tickle me version of happiness that we talk about in today's society. I prefer the old Greek version of it, eudaimonia. I've mispronounced it for years. I used to pronounce it eudaimonia. But it's the idea of human flourishing. And I love that idea of happiness because it shows we're all connected, and that true happiness also helps to uplift other people and makes you want to be there to uplift other people. So human flourishing that's my idea of being a beneficial presence too, is that I'm contributing to the human flourishing.
And I know at the expense of you being punctual or whatever, I asked that, but this is exactly what I mean when I say the Fledge's mission is to create opportunity to pursue happiness.
Absolutely.
It isn't the tickle me stuff and why aren't you smiling more and all that shit.
Right.
It's exactly what Adam just said.
Absolutely.
Great guest. Love you very much. Going to go through this quick part because you don't need all my kudos because I give them to you too much or so much. Take us out with something.
I'll go back to that idea of the human flourishing. Everybody has a unique gift and something to offer to the world. And like he said, whether it's just a smile or something like that. My fiance often, talks like that she's not a social butterfly, so she's not out and about a lot, so she doesn't think she offers a lot to the world. But I know for a fact that everybody she talks to, she touches.
Great advice. Great person. You are a lot more than what you were that got you in that place and what they told you were.
True that.
And I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here with us.
Thank you.
Very glad.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. See you all tomorrow. Reno will be on, and that's